Dark clouds gathered in the twilight sky, the wind whispered secrets through the twisting branches, and deep in the heart of the countryside, a farmer named Old William stood at the edge of his land. His weathered hands gripped the wooden fence post as he looked out over his fields, the corn waving gently like an ocean of gold. But this wasn't the peaceful evening it appeared to be. Trouble was brewing, and he could feel it in the very marrow of his bones. Just a few days earlier, he overheard hushed voices in the local tavern. They spoke of the highwaymen, ruthless bandits who roamed the roads, carving their territory, striking fear into the hearts of those who crossed their path. Whispers floated around, stating their next target was a small farm like his, a patch of green ripe for the taking. He recalled the stories of what had happened to others who stood in their way. Property burned, lives shattered. The thought of losing his land, the only home he had ever known, ignited a fire in him that hadn't flickered in years. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows stretched further. Old William paced back towards his farmhouse, determination etched across his weathered face. He had spent decades coaxing life from this soil, pouring his sweat and tears into every furrow he plowed. This place wasn't just land, it was a legacy, a bond handed down through generations. No bandit would take that from him without a fight. His mind raced. He couldn't just wait for them to arrive and take what was his. He needed a plan, something clever, something bold. And then it came to him like a spark igniting a dry wick. This wasn't just his farm, it was a well of potential. What if he made them think twice before they ever set foot on this land? The following morning, with the sun rising like a burning halo over the horizon, Old William set to work. He gathered old barrels, hunks of scrap wood, and anything else he could find lying around. The more he scavenged, the more excited he became. He hammered, he sawed, whimpered when he hit his thumb, but he pressed on. A day's labor passed, and as the sun sank once again, a peculiar sight spread across his humble farm. A series of grotesque, handmade scarecrows now loomed large, frighteningly lifelike, dressed in ragged clothes, with wooden faces painted to look sinister. Some had straw sticking out like wild hair, while others wielded clubs made from fallen branches. He placed one scarecrow at the entrance of each field, creating a line of guardians, fierce and ready, ensuring no passerby would dare approach his precious crops. But Old William wasn't done yet. As night draped its dark cloak across the skies, he lit lanterns and hung them from the trees, casting flickering shadows over the scarecrows. His farm transformed into a haunting spectacle, a battlefield of illusions. He wanted the highwaymen to think they faced an army, perhaps even a twisted version of the old farmer, prepared to stand his ground. Word spread. By the time dusk settled over the countryside, local farmers gathered to witness Old William's eerie display. They laughed at the sheer audacity of his plan, but deep down, they admired him. His courage gathered support. They all had felt the weight of fear on their shoulders, the constant threat of the highwaymen looming ever larger. Perhaps they'd rally around him, a united front against the encroaching darkness. A few days passed, and on one fateful night, as Old William settled into his creaky chair, smoke rising from the hearth, he heard a sound that made his heart race, the unmistakable clatter of hooves echoing on the gravel road. Tension trailed behind him like a second shadow. It was time. The highwaymen had come. Old William scurried to the window, peering through the thick glass. There they were, two men on horseback, clad in leather jackets, masked by shadows. Their eyes, gleaming with ambition, scanned the surroundings, their bodies tense, poised predators hunting for their prey. His fingers trembled around the barrel of his hunting rifle, but a different kind of tremor ran through him. They looked closer, more cautious than he had expected. The scarecrows did their job. The candlelight flickered against the glint of their swords, confusion evident on their faces. They appeared hesitant, whispering to each other as they eyed the strange guardians that stood unyielding in the fields. One of them muttered. Old William took a deep breath, summoning all of his courage. With careful, calculated steps, he moved quietly through the shadows and out into the night, the lanterns illuminating his way. He didn't want to startle them, but he needed them to see him. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out, his voice steady, meeting their gaze. The highwaymen stopped, surprised and uncertain, their expressions shifting from arrogance to hesitation. The larger of the two snarled, hand gripping the hilt of his sword, but old William held his ground. He gestured broadly toward the lifeless straw soldiers. The highwaymen blinked, their confidence shaken as they scrutinized the bizarre array of ferocity. "Sacred Mother Earth," one muttered under his breath. "I'd prefer to think of it as clever," old William replied, the fire in his eyes matching the valor dancing within. "You're welcome to try me, but I assure you this is no ordinary farm." The fear washed over the highwaymen, creeping into their very bones. They exchanged frantic glances, each wondering if the old farmer was indeed insane or brilliantly strategic. "Listen, we didn't come here to play games, old man. Hand over your harvest and we'll leave you what little's left," the second bandit stammered, though trepidation cloaked his tone. Old William chuckled softly, the sound a blend of amusement and ferocity. "And I'm sure tomorrow you'll wake up quite regretful, the taste of defeat lingering on your tongues." A moment hung in the air, charged with intensity, but the highwaymen's bravado began to crumble. They came looking for easy pickings, but now, faced with an unforeseen challenge, they faltered. Still, hesitation clouded one of their features, fear mingling with frustration. "If you seek to play with the spirits of the land, know that they guard it fiercely," old William replied, his voice dropping low, a thrum resounding with ancient wisdom. Suddenly, from behind him, a rustle echoed. A group of local farmers emerged from the shadows, rallied by old William's cry for help. Their presence added a power normally absent, the brothers at arms standing firm with him. With a glance of solidarity, old William felt a surge of warmth within him. They were not merely here to defend one man. They had come together to protect their homes, their families, their future. The scarecrows might have stirred confusion, but it was the unbreakable unity among friends that formed a wall against the highwaymen. Feeling the tide turn, the two men exchanged one last look, calculating the odds. In their eyes, old William and the farmers were not just an old man and his ragtag bunch of allies. They represented something far greater, a spirit of defiance, a reminder of the strength that lies buried in the roots of the earth. With a final growl, one of the bandits took the reins of his horse and spurred it into a retreat, and his partner followed suit, their bravado shattered in the face of solidarity and sheer will. The air around old William filled with laughter, relief sweeping through his chest as the threat evaporated into the night. He had defended his home not just with scarecrows, but with the unwavering bond of community. It was a resounding triumph, a reminder that courage and conviction can sway the balance of power. That evening, as the stars twinkled above like a million eyes watching over him, old William stood once again at the edge of his land. The fields glowed softly through the night, the silhouettes of the scarecrows now mighty protectors in the moonlight. Though trouble might come again, he would be ready. After all, what they had aimed to steal was more than just a farm. It was the heart of the land, nurtured and cultivated by the hands and spirits of those who called it home. Together, they had turned the tide against the darkness. And in that moment, old William knew the resilience of his legacy would endure, rooted in the soil and boldly reaching for the stars. Night fell heavy over the countryside, a blanket of darkness casting a veil over the scattered farms dotting the land. Somewhere, the wind howled. But on a solitary estate, a farmer named Ben Hartley stood rigid on his porch, the faint glow of lantern light flickering behind him. It wasn't just the chill of the autumn air that sent shivers racing down his spine. It was the whispers he'd heard from townsfolk about the highwaymen, ruthless bandits who roamed the nearby roads, seeking to wrestle vulnerable farms into submission. As he stared into the distance, his heart thudded like a drum in war. He had built everything he owned with grit and sweat, turning stubborn soil into rich fields of corn and grains. But the last few months had been bruising bounty stolen, neighbors harassed into silence. The highwaymen were on a rampage, and Ben knew his land was next. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes snapped him from his thoughts. There, just beyond the tree line, shadows shifted. A knot twisted in his stomach as he recognized the silhouette of a horse. He stepped down from the porch, squinting toward the figures emerging from the dark. Two men clad in tattered leather, faces hidden beneath dark hoods, moved closer, eyes gleaming with greedy ambition. "You've got something we want, farmer," one of them shouted, a twisted grin stretching across his face. Ben's chest tightened. He could run, he could cower, but those options made him sick. "You won't find me easy pickings," he called back, his voice steady. The men laughed, the sound cold like shards of ice. "We've heard stories about you, old man." But in that moment, something snapped within Ben, an unwavering resolve bolstered by years of hard work, by the love of the land that cradled him. He had witnessed the terror these men inflicted time and again. He couldn't allow that terror to creep onto his land, not into his life. Fueled by desperation, he shouted back, "You think I'll give up my farm just like that?" The highwaymen exchanged glances but didn't dismiss him. Instead, they stepped closer, confidence bubbling over their bravado, until one of them taunted, "What will you do?" Ben felt the burn of adrenaline rush through him. And that's when the spark ignited. Not an explosion of violence, but a flash of cunning. His mind raced, formulating a plan even as they advanced. Ben was no stranger to adversity. He'd faced storms head-on and knew how to bend rather than break. "All right, let's make a deal," he proposed suddenly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You say you want my land." The whirlwind of surprise flickered across their faces. Ben took a step forward, each movement purposeful. The gamble was huge, but desperation sometimes bore the fruit of ingenuity. "You want grain, you'll help me harvest it." The highwaymen looked at each other, considering this strange offer. They were mercenaries, after all. Maybe there was something to this deal. The larger man asked, scratching his chin, "Because if you do this right, you can claim more than just my land," Ben replied, the words rolling off his tongue with surprising ease. For a moment, silence enveloped them, a tension that crackled like the static before a storm. Finally, the shorter bandit chuckled. "All right, farmer, you've got a deal, but don't think for a second we won't be watching you." With the deal struck, Ben's heart raced, but now with a pulse of strategy rather than fear. He just persuaded 2 highwaymen to work for him, but in doing so, he had to play a dangerous game. As days turned to nights, the farmers of the surrounding land began to notice strange happenings. Ben hosted a charade of harvesting. The highwaymen, masked bravado paired with sinister laughs, moved between the corn stalks, their presence commanding a reluctant respect. They scoured the fields, piling grain into makeshift carts, but more importantly, they were sowing the seeds of doubt among the other farmers, capturing their attention. Rumors snaked through the villages. "Have you seen how the Hartley farm has flourished?" Gradually, whispers transformed into outright fear. The others started pulling together their own makeshift defenses, employing their own plans to shield against the looming danger. But Ben wasn't just standing idle on the porch, watching it all happen. Every evening, he worked tirelessly alongside the highwaymen, secretly plotting his next move. He listened to their banter, learned their weaknesses, and began stockpiling supplies. For while he worked hand in hand with the enemy, his true purpose lay lodged on the cusp of rebellion. Then one fateful night came. A storm brewed ominously on the horizon. Lightning illuminated the land in fits, flashes that drowned out the darkness. Ben stood stoically in the eye of the storm, feeling the pulses of tension rise around him. He had chosen his moment. When the highwaymen finished their work for the night, they gathered in the barn, intoxicated by their sense of power. Ben walked in, heart pounding against his chest, but his expression stole fear from the air. "Listen," he began, voice steady. "You've enjoyed this little game, but this land isn't yours to take." A pause, the air thickened. The larger bandit shot him a warning look, swaggering close, trying to intimidate. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to show you that this community is stronger than you think," Ben replied, his eyes narrowing. He turned and exited the barn, beckoning them to follow. Reluctantly, they did, single file. Outside, he pointed toward the horizon where flickering candlelight danced among the trees, a gathering of farmers who had come together, emboldened by Ben's courage. They watched with solemn eyes, united as a force against their common enemy. "Look," he shouted, the thunder of his voice echoing into the night. Intimidation faded, revealing the ripple of uncertainty beneath their bravado. One of the highwaymen sneered, but it lacked conviction, an emperor with nothing but an empty crown. "If you think you can take us down with a few peasants, you're sorely mistaken," the smaller man retorted, trying to regain control of the situation. Ben stepped forward, reclaiming momentum. And if you think you can thrive on the spoils of fear, you're wrong. This is a community built on hard work and resilience. You might have taken from others before, but you will not take from me. Before they could react, thunder boomed in the sky, and the farmers surged forward like a wave breaking against the shoreline. There was no hesitation, no fear, just raw energy fueled by a common cause. The highwaymen, caught off guard, shifted back but soon realized they were nowhere near as powerful as they had thought. The farmers pressed on, shouting in anger, waving tools like torches of light against encroaching darkness. An explosion of movement erupted. Ben felt the surge around him as the farmers joined him shoulder to shoulder, a wall of deep-set determination unyielding in the face of intimidation. Shouted the larger bandit, panic flashing across his face as they backed away, realizing they were outmatched and outnumbered. Before they could take another step back, Ben threw up his arm, a signal for the farmers to maintain their ground. He yelled. With that, it became clear. The highwaymen had underestimated not just the strength of a single farmer, but the resilience of an entire community coming together as one. Suddenly, a frantic ride ignited the scene as the two bandits scrambled for their horses, their bravado all but vanished. The farmers roared, a rallying cry echoing through the darkened fields. It seemed like an eternity, the air thick with tension, but the farmers held their ground, representing the strength they'd forged together in countless battles against nature, not outlaws. Ben watched them scurry away, melting back into the night, leaving nothing but the imprint of their greed behind. The farmers erupted in cheers, and Ben felt a swell of pride rush through him. It was more than a victory. It was a testament to unity, to standing tall against tyranny. That evening, as the moon rose high, illuminating the fields once starved of hope, everything changed. They hadn't merely defended their land, they'd forged bonds stronger than steel. In the face of terror, they had stood together, ready to fight. With each farmer sharing stories of courage sparked by that night's events, they planted seeds of resistance, of determination, of a future they would build together. No longer just landowners, they were guardians of hope. Ben returned to his farmhouse, the warmth radiating from within. He knew this would not be the last test of their resolve, but in the fire of that threat, they found strength in unity. They learned that standing up isn't merely an act of defiance. It's a declaration of life, of choosing one's own destiny on their own soil. And that is not something that could be taken lightly or easily again. As dawn broke over the fields, it painted a picture of possibility. Would tell what the future held, but for now the shadows receded, and the heart of the land beat bold and strong against the remnants of fear. Ben stood watch, knowing they had written a story not just of survival, but of triumph, the tale of how darkness could bring forth the light. The cold wind swept through the fields like an ominous specter, whispering secrets of a dread that lingered just beyond the horizon. Joshua Collins stood on his porch, heart racing, eyes fixed on the dust swirling up the road. His farm, a patchwork of green and brown, had been the lifeblood of his family for generations. Yet news had churned up like the storm clouds overhead, rumors of highwaymen prowling the countryside, looking to take what didn't belong to them. Just days before, at the local tavern, he had overheard the hushed conversations, men trembling in their boots, recounting tales of bandits who descended upon small farmers like vultures on carrion. Those who resisted had found nothing left but smoldering ruins and despair. Joshua's fists clenched. He'd be damned if he watched as they turned his hard work to ash. As dusk fell, casting a cloak of shadows over the land, he knew time was running out. The highwaymen wouldn't take long to find him. He needed a plan, a way to outsmart them before they even thought to approach. But how? Joshua walked the rows of corn, feeling the sturdy stalks beneath his calloused hands, sensing their strength, and suddenly inspiration struck. Over the next few days, while the whispers of chaos wafted through the air like fallen leaves, Joshua worked tirelessly. By dawn, he was up gathering supplies, wooden barrels, rope, anything he could repurpose for his scheme. The townsfolk watched him curiously, murmurs of madness swirling around, but he was undeterred. He had a vision. His plan wasn't about brute force, but about deception. Joshua began constructing an elaborate series of scarecrows positioned around his fields, each one more menacing than the last. He dressed them in torn clothes and gave them faces that twisted into intimidating grins, with sticks for arms raised as if ready to fight. Some bore homemade weapons, wooden swords, pitchforks, anything to conjure fear. As he worked, he couldn't help but chuckle. These bizarre characters stood for more than just protection. They embodied his resolve. When the day finally came, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the terrain. Joshua stood at the edge of his land, taking in his handiwork. The scarecrows loomed tall and defiant, a makeshift army guarding the heart of his farm. He lit lanterns hung from trees and placed them strategically around the scarecrows. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the flickering lights transformed the eerie figures into ghostly guardians. Night settled in, and the darkness cloaked the landscape, swallowing the familiar sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. Joshua sat on his porch, waiting. Fear slithered in, but he held it at bay with the determination forged in each row he planted, each crop he nurtured. The hour grew late, and just when he thought his heart might give in to doubt, he heard it, the clatter of hooves on the gravel road. A chill ran down his spine. There they were, two men on horses, cloaked in shadows, eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. As they drew nearer, he could see their faces twisted by greed and malice. "Hey!" one of them shouted, his voice harsh and demanding. "What's with all the decorations?" Joshua stepped down from the porch, calm and unwavering. His voice echoed firmly against the cool night. The bandits exchanged glances, a flicker of surprise crossing their features. "You think you can outsmart us with a few scarecrows?" Joshua chuckled, a sound filled with confidence. "You really underestimate their power." The highwaymen shifted nervously, unsure whether to laugh or be enraged. Joshua sensed the hesitation, and with each word he commanded their attention. He pointed toward the scarecrows, emphasized the foreign feel of the situation. "You want to risk it? I'll even let you choose your weapon," he mocked, gesturing towards the makeshift arms clutched by the straw figures. The larger bandit took a step forward, eyes narrowing. "Danger is only as real as you make it." Joshua's confidence cut through the tension like a knife. The bandits began to shift, discomfort growing in the silence that surrounded them. Joshua watched them closely, tracking their every movement. He could see them weighing their options. A farmer, a handful of straw men, and an entire community behind him. This facade was working. Finally, the smaller bandit shifted back, sensing the tide turning. "This is a bluff." "I'm not hiding," Joshua replied, stepping closer, his voice gaining strength. "I'm standing my ground." The taller bandit raised an eyebrow, their bluster fading, but a flicker of desperation ignited within him as he unsheathed a rusted dagger. In that tense moment, Joshua realized that while fear was natural, courage could shift the tides. With the adrenaline surging through him, he stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides, his heart pounding. With every word, Joshua felt emboldened, not just as a farmer, but as a protector, a guardian of his legacy. The bandits glanced at each other, uncertainty sinking into their bones. The scarecrows stood unyieldingly, mere manifestations of Joshua's will, but effective nonetheless. And just then behind him, an echo, rustling sound that grew louder. Joshua turned his head slightly, and in the distance he could see lights approaching like fireflies dancing along the edge of the fields. It was the neighboring farmers, drawn by the commotion. One of the bandits shouted in horror, lifting his chin in despair. Joshua seized the moment. "We may be outnumbered now, you see," he declared, "but we are not outmatched." The bandits hesitated, eyes darting between Joshua and the approaching lights, anxiety slicing through the bravado they had vainly clutched onto. They were no longer two imposing figures. They were now deeply aware of the community standing strong and united, the farmers prepared to shoulder the burden and protect their own. The smaller bandit shouted, panic threading through his voice. They turned their horses, galloping back the way they came, their laughter lost to the night as they fled. As the last sound of hoofbeats faded, the neighboring farmers poured out from the shadows, lanterns bobbing like fireflies across the landscape. Joshua felt a swell of pride open in his chest as they cheered, hands clapping on backs and shoulders, the warmth of camaraderie spreading like the dawn. "Joshua," one farmer called, voice thick with admiration. With a grin that spread wide across his face, he laughed, caught in the infectious energy around him. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." And in that moment, the fear that loomed over the fields began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of security, a bond forged in the fire of adversity. They celebrated late into the night, songs reverberating around the farmhouse, where once there was only despair. But the victory was not without its lessons. In the days that followed, they fortified their defenses. Together, they planted seeds of unity, building a network of support that wove through the community like roots spreading underground. Each farmer would look after one another, sharing stories and resources in the face of threats, forever changed by the shared triumph. As seasons changed and life on the farm thrived, Joshua became both a farmer and a leader. Where he once worried about losing his land to highwaymen, he now focused on ensuring nothing could divide them again. The scarecrows remained as guardians, standing proudly in the fields well after harvest, reminders of their victory and the power of unity. The legend of Joshua Collins spread through the countryside, a story of one man's bravery becoming a rallying cry for all. And under that eternal starry sky, surrounded by the flickering lanterns and the sound of laughter, Joshua knew that while danger may return, they would meet it together. He had not just protected a piece of land. He had nurtured a community, and together they were stronger, more formidable than any bandit could ever hope to be. In the heart of winter, when storms threatened to break the land, they would gather, sharing warmth and strength, reminding each other that fear could only breed when faced alone. But together, they were unbreakable, emboldened by victories small and large, fueled by the unyielding spirit of the farmer who stood up to the darkness with nothing but a plan and an unshakable heart. And that spirit would live on, echoing through the fields, whispering tales of courage to generations yet to come. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the fields of corn that swayed gently in the breeze. For farmer Jack McAllister, this was not just land. It was home, nurtured from the soil by sweat and toil. But the peace of the rural landscape was shattered by whispers of terror, highwaymen, ruthless thieves who roamed the roads, threatening to take everything he held dear. Just days before, as Jack sat nursing a pint in the local tavern, he had overheard the hushed voices of fellow farmers. One by one, they shared stories filled with fear, recounting how the highwaymen had come like wolves in the night to pillage their farms. "They'll take your land and leave you with nothing," a man muttered, his voice trembling. Jack felt his stomach turn. He knew he couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't. That night, as the stars twinkled ominously above, Jack lay awake, his mind racing. The fear swirled around him like the cold autumn air. How could he protect his home without resorting to violence? In a world where the strong preyed on the weak, he needed a plan, something clever, something bold. As dawn broke, illuminating the dew-kissed fields, an idea sparked in Jack's mind. He would use the very tools of the farm to outsmart the highwaymen. He'd create something unexpected, something that could turn the tide in his favor. As he stood at the edge of his property, he took a deep breath, surveying the fields, and felt a surge of determination. The next couple of days were a whirlwind of activity. Jack worked tirelessly, gathering supplies from around the farm. He pieced together wooden frames, straw, and old clothes, anything he could find to create lifelike figures. The entire village watched with a mix of curiosity and concern as he transformed his quiet farm into a bizarre display. By the end of the week, he had constructed an army of scarecrows, each one more menacing than the last. Jack dressed them in his old clothes, giving them wooden faces twisted into snarls. He placed them artfully throughout the fields and even rigged a few to hold pitchforks and rusty tools. They looked fierce, almost alive, ready to defend the land. But he didn't stop there. Under the cover of night, Jack set lanterns around the perimeter, illuminating the scarecrows in a dance of flickering light. Their shadows stretched long, stretching like looming giants over the rows of corn. As he stepped back to admire his creation, he couldn't help but smile. It was a plan wrapped in deception, a plan meant to instill fear. The following evening, the smell of impending rain hung heavy in the air. As the clouds rolled in, so did a rumble of hooves, the unmistakable sound of trouble. Two figures emerged, clad in dark cloaks, faces obscured by shadows. Jack felt his pulse quicken. There they were, the Highwaymen. "Hey there," one of them shouted, hewing confidence over the land like a sword. Jack stepped forward, heart pounding, deciding to meet their bravado with a calm but defiant stance. The men smirked, glancing at the scarecrows that lined the field. "What are these? Your guards?" "That's where you're wrong," Jack replied, his voice firm, echoing the strength he'd built within himself over the years. "You see, each scarecrow represents something." The bandits exchanged glances, the laughter fading from their eyes. Sneered the larger one, nearly stepping closer. Jack felt a spark of adrenaline course through him. "You've come into the wrong field, gentlemen. This land has been protected for generations, and many have tried to take it." The tension thickened in the air. The bandits hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their bravado. Jack seized the opportunity, gesturing toward the scarecrows. "You want my grain?" the smaller bandit muttered, glancing back at his partner. But Jack held firm, a smile creeping over his lips as he offered the bait. "Why don't you give it a shot?" The larger bandit let out a furious growl, unsure and desperate, but instead of charging forward, he faltered. Jack watched as doubt crept in, like the shadows gathering under the trees. "You think you can scare us with these jokes?" But Jack's confidence began to spread, slipping its way into the cracks of their bravado. Shadows danced around them as gusts of wind swayed the lanterns, making the scarecrows appear to shift and come alive. "Then come on up, try me," Jack called, raising his voice just enough to mask the tremor inside. "But know this, if you step foot on my land, you will regret it." Just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, a shape appeared in the distance, a shadow against the darkened horizon. Snippets of whispers floated through the air. The neighbors had come, his allies, farmers who had witnessed the deceit of the Highwaymen before. Bit by bit they approached, lanterns aglow, forming a collective wave of strength that surged behind Jack. They stood there as a wall of defiance, the collective energy igniting the night with a flame of hope. Jack heard their assurances echoing through the fall air, a pact of unwavering friendships. They wouldn't let one man, nor one group of bandits, tear their community apart. The Highwaymen exchanged tense looks. They were faced not with the farmers' singular resolve, but an entire army of solidarity and grit. Jack took a step forward. "You see, it's not just about me." The larger one sneered, trying to regain their composure, but the quiver in his voice betrayed him. "Not scared," Jack urged. "Just unwise, you're outnumbered." The tension broke like a wave against a cliff as the men turned on their heels, terror etched in their expressions as they bolted away into the night. Their laughter became panic-drenched screams, fading into the distance. Jack felt a rush of triumph as the shadows retreated. Laughter erupted among the gathered farmers, voices mingling under the moonlight, a chorus of relieved celebration. "You did it, Jack." As cheers rang through the cool night air, Jack felt a warmth bloom in his chest, threads of gratitude weaving through him. They had weathered the storm together and emerged stronger. The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they fortified their defenses, sharing strategies and creating communication lines among the neighboring farms. Each farmer shared what they could: weather reports, news of travelers passing through, and even tips on protective measures. Jack became a central figure, leading discussions and brainstorming responses to any potential threats. Community meetings became a ritual, sealing their bonds tighter than ever. Fall faded into winter, and with it came the challenges of the season. Days turned into evenings filled with labor that felt endless, but there was something new, a sense of camaraderie, a bond that had formed through shared fears and victories. They stood together against the elements just as they had stood against the Highwaymen. One day, while Jack was out in the fields, a letter arrived, a note scrawled hastily from a neighboring town that warned of new threats lurking nearby. Highwaymen had returned. The news sparked a fire that rushed through him, lighting his spirit as the memories of their bravery and unity pressed at his heart. That evening, Jack called an emergency meeting. As farmers gathered beneath the old oak tree, lanterns flickering, he felt the weight of his responsibility pressing upon him. "They might think we're vulnerable, but they don't know us." He gestured toward the horror tales of last fall. In the days ahead, They reinforced their scarecrows and devised new strategies. Each family contributed. Some brought old tools, others prepared traps, and many concerned themselves with building a stronger support network. Children learned to read maps, while elders shared tales of wisdom from their youth, bonding over hardships past. As the snow began to melt and the first buds of spring broke through the thawing earth, they held a festival, a celebration that seemed to herald not just the changing of the seasons, but the strengthening of their unity. They feasted and danced, laughed and sang, their spirits high, knowing that they faced everything together. But winter's chill had left a mark. With the warmer weather, those ominous whispers returned, bringing rumors of highwaymen attempting to rally their forces once again, a far more formidable group than before. Jack felt a shiver run up his spine, flashes of doubt breaking the surface. But he shook it off. There was no room for fear among friends. As night fell one fateful evening, Jack gathered everyone once more, feeling the weight of history in the air. The village was tense, watching him for direction. Declared, his words igniting sparks in the faces around him. "We will stand our ground." As they prepared to face the highwaymen together, an urgency gripped them all. Jack organized lookout points, each farmer tasked with sharing updates while the scarecrows doubled as a warning system. The fields hummed with an energy only a unified community could provide, a testament to their resilience. Days passed with no sign of trouble, but every night brought a sense of anticipation, eyes scanning the horizon. But hope blossomed as crops emerged from the ground, green and vibrant, a symbol of their perseverance. Then one night, while the farmers gathered around the fire in the center of the village, a piercing scream shattered the peace. A neighbor rushed in, breathless. "They're here, the highwaymen." The atmosphere shifted from calm to chaos in an instant. Jack's heart raced, depth charged with adrenaline as farmhands moved into action. Each person took their place, ready to defend their home, fueled by the resolve that had blossomed over seasons of struggle. The highwaymen approached, a small cavalcade of cloaked figures, eyes fierce and searching. The same faces that had once turned tail in fear were now inches from their doorstep. But this time they were different. They seemed prepared, their arrogance now replaced by menace. Jack stood tall at the front, grounding himself. The bandits laughed, menacingly edging closer, their intentions clear. "You'll regret standing against us, old man." But before they could advance, Jack thrust his arm forward, signaling his neighbors, and the scarecrows behind him took center stage. Flickering torches lit their silhouettes, casting elongated shadows that loomed ominously over the bandits. "We are a community. We have faced you before and will do it again." Jack's voice rang out, strong and unwavering. The bandits hesitated for a moment. The air hung heavy with tension, uncertainty breaking through the facade of bravado. They had underestimated the strength that lay within not just Jack, but the entire community facing them. Just then, one of the bandits pointed toward the scarecrows, realizing they were surrounded by more than just straw. He growled. Jack allowed a quiet smile to emerge. Their resolve began to waver. The farmers behind Jack stood ready, resilient, and fierce, holding onto hope forged through trials. The bandits turned again, doubt pulling at their confidence, and Jack pressed his advantage. The sea of faces around Jack, lit by flickering firelight, began to shift forward, a wave of unstoppable force cresting towards the intruders. The bandits could sense the change. One of them yelled, and in a moment, the history of the McAllister farm had shifted once again. The highwaymen turned, bolting back into the darkness from which they came, shadows retreating into the night like echoes subsiding after a thunderous storm. The farmers erupted into cheers, the air alive with exhilaration. Jack felt a flood of relief wash over him as they embraced, laughter filling the void that once trembled with fear. They danced under the moonlight, celebrating not just a triumphant moment but their unbroken unity. Days turned into weeks and the threat of the highwaymen receded. The village thrived, becoming a sanctuary of strength and resilience. Jack knew the battle would always linger in the air, but they had etched their story into the fabric of their community, a story that defined them. As seasons continued to shift, whispers of how Farmer Jack stood against highwaymen spread through neighboring towns, igniting a spark of fearlessness in those who had long succumbed to intimidation. They had witnessed the strength of one man lead 100 hearts standing tall in unison. And in moments of quiet reflection, Jack would often stroll through his fields, breathing in the fresh air, a reminder of the battles fought and the bonds forged. He realized that his greatest weapon had not been the scarecrows or even his own bravery. It had been the love and unity of a community willing to fight not just for land, but for one another. The scars of fear would always remain reminders of their past, but it was the threads of hope, resilience, and togetherness that painted the future bright. And as the stars twinkled overhead, Jack smiled, knowing that the farm was more than a piece of land. It was a place where courage took root, living on in the hearts of those who dared to stand together against darkness. The sun dipped low over the sprawling fields, casting a warm, golden light that kissed the tips of the corn. This serene scene was shattered by the piercing sound of horses galloping, the ground trembling beneath their weight. Caleb Dawson, an honest farmer, had heard the stories, tales of ruthless highwaymen who swept through the countryside, tearing apart lives and robbing those who toiled day after day. As he stood on his porch, a chill of realization crept over him. The highwaymen were not just an unsettling rumor, they were a very real danger, and they were coming. Caleb tightened his grip on the porch railing, watching the figures drawing closer, black silhouettes against the setting sun. His heart raced, instinctively tuning into the primal feeling of fear. "Not today," he muttered under his breath. No, he wouldn't let them take what belonged to him. He couldn't let them tear his family's legacy apart. This was his land, passed down through generations, where his ancestors had sown seeds into the earth with love and labor. At sunset, the two highwaymen drew near, cloaked in dark leathers, faces hidden behind masks. They approached with an air of arrogance, their horses snorting at the scent of danger. Caleb moved to the edge of the fence, eyes narrowing. One of the men shouted, his voice dripping with disdain. Caleb stood tall, calling on the fire inside him. The highwaymen exchanged glances, surprised by his courage. "This is your last chance," the other man warned, pulling a dagger from his belt. Caleb's mind raced. He couldn't match them in strength, but he could outsmart them. For weeks he had been devising a plan that would show these men that he was not just a farmer, he was a protector of his land. As if sensing his resolve, the first highwayman scoffed. "You think you can scare us with bravado?" But Caleb had something they didn't expect. He had thought ahead. He picked up a rusty old pitchfork that leaned against the fence. "You don't know what you're in for," he declared, thrusting the pitchfork into the ground, a signal as much as a threat. Suddenly, a distant rumble echoed across the fields, and the bandits turned their heads in confusion. It was the sound of machinery. Caleb's carefully staged performance had begun. Hidden behind the farmhouse and along the borders of his land, he had set up a series of old tractors, their engines poised to roar to life at his command. He had planted traps and distractions, ready to spring at a moment's notice. With a quick twist, he activated the trap mechanism. The roar of engines filled the air, reverberating through the night. The ground shook as if an army had been awakened. The scarecrows he dressed to look like warriors stood tall, illuminated by the tractor's headlights. It was a fearsome sight. Caleb seized the moment. "You see those figures? Those aren't just scarecrows, they're defenders." The highwaymen exchanged discordant glances, uncertainty written across their faces. They hadn't counted on this. Distraction turned to panic as the sound of rattling metal filled the air, further echoing Caleb's conviction. Caleb demanded, stepping forward as if he had an entire army behind him. "This farm is protected." In a moment of hesitation, the larger bandit faltered. We shouldn't have come here," he grumbled under his breath. The confidence that once radiated from them began to dissolve, replaced with an inkling of fear. The other bandit hissed, his bravado cracking. "We can take them." Caleb's heart thundered, believing that he could win this showdown with skill rather than force. "You're welcome to try," he replied, maintaining a fierce gaze. As the tension hung thick in the air, the second bandit gulped audibly, eyes twitching toward the crowd of scarecrows. That flicker of doubt was all Caleb needed. "It's not just about me. This land is alive with generations of strength, and I've got an entire community behind me," he called into the shadows, voice rising. The two men began to back away slowly, clearly sensing the tide shifting. The larger one shouted, eyes wide with fear. Caleb held his ground, watching as they retreated. "You'll find that this farm stands united." Seeing the highwaymen bolt, the adrenaline surged through him. The sound of their hooves receding became a chorus of relief, echoing through the moonlit fields. Caleb stood tall, victorious, knowing that even in fear, he had summoned the strength to defend his home. As word spread across the farming community, whispers of Caleb's steadfastness became tales of inspiration. Neighbors visited, bringing assistance and solidarity. Strangers turned into friends, and soon enough, his small farm blossomed into a haven where everyone looked out for each other. Through dinner tables and gathering around the fire, they shared stories and laughter, bonds deepening as the seasons shifted. Caleb felt a warmth in his heart, the kind that could only be nourished by togetherness. But as the days turned into weeks, danger lurked just beyond the horizon. Reports of the highwaymen began to circulate again, this time saying that they were gathering reinforcements. Caleb knew they'd return, and he wouldn't sit idly by. He began devising an even bigger plan, one that would show the bandits that their threats could never extinguish the fire of their community. Every evening, with the sun setting in vibrant colors, Caleb rallied his fellow farmers, sharing strategies and ideas for their collective defense. They transformed the scarecrow soldiers into something truly formidable, adding creativity to the mix. During their meetings, laughter mingled with focused discussions as they brainstormed. A neighbor brought old barrels and they filled them with food to bait the bandits. "Leave it on the edge of the woods," Caleb said, smirking. "Let them think they're getting an easy meal." As several weeks passed, murmurs about the approaching bandits grew louder, a restless anxiety threading through their community. One evening, a local farmer burst into Caleb's barn, panting, "They're coming." The group fell silent, tension gripping the air. Faces turned somber, worry etching deep lines in their brows. But Caleb stood strong, heart brimming with resolve. "Then let them come. We will show them what happens when they challenge this land." The night before they expected the attack, the farmers worked late, setting up their defenses. They positioned cans on strings around the outer perimeter, rigging a system that would make a racket at the first sign of intrusion. As darkness enveloped the farm, lanterns flickered, casting a warm glow, but the hands that worked were driven by determination. "Stick together," Caleb reminded them, voice resonant with intensity. Following morning, the stillness was thick, a tense silence draping the fields as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Caleb and the farmers took their positions, weapons at the ready, hearts pounding in synchrony. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional rustle of the wind through the corn. Just when it seemed that perhaps the bandits had changed their minds, a shadow appeared on the horizon, a cluster of figures riding toward them. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment they had prepared for. He commanded as the furious gallop of hooves grew louder. When the highwaymen finally arrived, their arrogance preceded them. One of the men shouted, but his bravado faltered as he took in the scene. Their numbers had multiplied and the farmers were ready. Caleb shouted, holding his ground defiantly. The bandits laughed, but behind their bravado lay fear, uncertainty playing across their faces. Caleb sensed it, emboldened by the unity surrounding him. "We fight for our land, for our future." At his command, the cans on the strings rattled with a cacophony of noise, startling the horses and sending chaos through the bandit ranks. It was a perfect distraction, throwing them into disarray. They surged forward, but the farmers stood tall, orchestrating their defense like a well-rehearsed performance. The scarecrows, now painted and armed, caught shadows against the sun, giving the appearance of a menacing army ready to fight. The highwaymen quickly reevaluated their approach, but chaos was already gripping them. Caleb shouted commands and the farmers followed suit, barricading themselves together, pushing back against the encroaching threats. With shouts of encouragement, they pressed on, taking advantage of their numbers, and the fear began to seep into the very souls of the bandits. In just moments, the confidence they had exuded melted away, replaced by panic. One of the bandits yelled in desperation as they turned to flee, eyes wide with terror. They had come expecting easy prey but encountered an army united. As they rode away, Caleb's heart soared. The farmers erupted in victory, laughter mingling with relieved cheers echoing across the fields. In a moment of triumph, Caleb stood tall, the weight of fear replaced with the lightness of victory. From that day forward, the mighty spirit of the community could never be questioned again. Neighbors visited often, sharing stories of courage, building a legacy of perseverance that bloomed and flourished through every season. Together, they had defied the odds, defeating the Highwaymen not just by force, but through the power of unity, standing together, fearlessly ready to protect what mattered most: their homes, their crops, and each other. As the years rolled on, Caleb knew that while the shadows of danger would always linger on the horizon, they would face whatever came together. And throughout it all, they would thrive, not just as farmers, but as guardians of their land, forever sowing the seeds of hope and resilience into the very fabric of their community. Through thriving laughter and shared stories under starlit skies, they had woven their tale a tapestry of bravery that would forever remind them that in the heart of unity, they could withstand any storm. And so, the farm that was once threatened now stood as a beacon of strength, forever echoing the determination and courage of those who dared to defend it. The sun hung low in the autumn sky, casting an eerie golden glow across the rolling hills. The fields of golden wheat rippled like ocean waves in the gentle breeze. Yet, amidst this beauty, danger loomed on the horizon. Farmer Thomas Hargrove had felt the tension in the air that week, a storm brewing not in the skies above, but in the hearts of men. Tales of highwaymen marauding through the countryside had sent ripples of fear through the farming community. They were a ruthless bunch, known for their thievery and violence, leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. Late one evening, as dusk cloaked the land in shadow, Thomas leaned on his weathered fence, his gaze fixated on the dark tree line that bordered his farm. The whispered tales he'd overheard in the village tavern replayed in his mind, stories of neighbors losing everything at the hands of these predators. Fear gnawed at him like a hungry wolf. However, deep within that fear bubbled a fierce sense of determination. He couldn't let them take what was his. He wouldn't. Thomas spent sleepless nights crafting a plan. As he lay beneath the wooden rafters of his barn, his mind raced with ideas. The more he thought about it, the clearer his vision became. These highwaymen saw farmers as easy targets, but Thomas was determined to turn the tables. If they wanted a fight, he would give them one on his terms. With each dawn that followed, he rose earlier than the sun, fueled by resolve. He gathered supplies from around the farm: old wood, rusty tools, and anything he could repurpose into something formidable. Neighbors watched with a mix of curiosity and concern as he toiled, piecing together an army of scarecrows. But these were no ordinary scarecrows. Thomas fashioned them like soldiers, with wooden faces adorned with expressions of rage and determination. He even crafted crude weapons for them, a pitchfork here, a hoe there, as if they were ready to defend the very earth he had fought for all his life. As the days passed, the highwaymen's reputation preceded them. Word arrived that a band was seen scouting nearby farms, sizing up their next targets. Thomas felt the anxiety seep deeper into his bones, but it only hardened his resolve. His scarecrows didn't just stand in the fields. They became symbols of defiance, a testament to what he was prepared to protect. One drizzly evening, as the clouds hung heavy and the wind howled through the trees, he completed the last of his scarecrows. He stepped back to admire the eerie sight rows of towering figures silhouetted against the twilight sky, illuminated by the flickering light of lanterns he had hung. The night fell, blanketing the land in darkness. Just as Thomas settled into his chair, an unsettling sound pierced the stillness, the unmistakable clatter of hooves on the gravel road. His heart raced as he peered out through the window, gaze fixed on the figures approaching. There they were, two highwaymen riding close, cloaked in dark leather, their faces concealed in shadow. He murmured to himself, resolve tightening around his heart as he felt the old adrenaline kick in. He moved swiftly to the porch, his breath steady and determined. The highwaymen halted just past the fence, laughter escaping their lips like the caw of a crow. "Well, well," one of them called out, eyes glinting with mischievous delight. "You've got quite the impressive display of scarecrows, old man." "Get off my land," Thomas retorted, voice firm yet unsettlingly calm. The larger bandit grinned, stepping down from his horse. "What's a farmer like you going to do?" Thomas lifted his chin, the weight of generations of farmers resting on his shoulders. "You'll find I'm not an easy target." Laughter erupted again, fueled by their arrogance, but in their eyes a flicker of uncertainty awakened. The second bandit leaned against his horse, arms crossed. With a thought racing through his mind, Thomas lowered his gaze for just a moment, then signaled toward the scarecrows. They might not be real men, but they're the start of something bigger. The highwaymen's bravado faltered as confusion settled between them. "You think you can intimidate us with?" The larger one scoffed, yet his voice shook slightly. "Intimidation? No," Thomas replied, his voice steady. "But you'll find that this is no ordinary farm." And just as he spoke, he stepped lightly around the porch, flicking a switch. The engines that lay dormant in the barn roared to life, vibrating through the ground like the growling of a beast awoken from a slumber. The sound echoed in the stillness, sending a tremor through the bandits. The second one snarled, eyes darting toward the barn. Thomas smiled, sensing the tide beginning to shift. "It's a warning." And suddenly he activated a hidden mechanism, releasing small, shaky drones made from spare parts. They buzzed into the air, drawing circles above the bandits' heads, casting eerie shadows on their faces. As they glinted in the moonlight, confusion deepened and their bravado cracked. Shouted the larger bandit, panic tinging his voice. Their confidence evaporated as they scrambled back to their horses, fumbling and frantic. The highwaymen had expected a defenseless farmer, but Thomas had turned the tables. Thomas stood there, heart pounding, not just from adrenaline but from a sense of triumph. The bandits' fear became palpable as they mounted their horses and raced away into the night, the sounds of their clattering hooves fading into a distance. The echo of their retreating forms filled him with exhilaration, his soul swelling with victory. Thomas let out a triumphant cheer that rang across his fields, an anthem of defiance echoing against the night sky. As the sun broke over the horizon the next day, the reality of his victory began to sink in. He wasn't just loner farmer Thomas anymore. He was a protector, a defender of his land, a beacon of resistance. But even in joy, he knew that the bandits wouldn't give up easily. They would return. In the days that followed, word spread through the nearby town. "Have you heard about the farmer who stood up to the highwaymen?" Laughter and admiration fueled a new spirit among the townsfolk. They began to pay attention, and soon enough, they visited Thomas, eager to learn from his experience. They arrived with their own tales of losses and fears, stories that intertwining like the roots of great trees. Inspired, Thomas organized community meetings at the local tavern, discussing strategies for the defense of their land and livelihoods. Together, they fortified their defenses and devised new plans, cementing bonds of trust and friendship. He knew the enemy was still out there, smarter and more determined than ever, but he felt untouchable, armed with so many allies. Autumn rolled on, and with it came a sense of purpose and community that hadn't existed before. Harvest time arrived, and the farmers worked in unison, their laughter ringing through the golden fields. But somewhere in the back of Thomas's mind, the highwaymen lurked, like shadows waiting for the perfect moment. Then one fateful night, not long after their victory, whispers reached the community that the highwaymen had gathered a larger gang, preparing to strike hard. Feeling the urgency in the air, Thomas organized yet another meeting in the barn under a canopy of twinkling stars. As he looked around at the familiar faces, each sharing the resolve of unity, he felt a fire ignite within him once more. "They think they can intimidate us," he began, voice unwavering. "But if we stand together, we can overcome anything. We've faced them before and won." The farmers nodded, eyes gleaming with determination. They all knew what lay ahead. They began crafting weapons out of materials they had on hand, old farming tools turned into instruments of defense. They practiced, rehearsing moves like a theater group in a play that would have no second chance. The night of the anticipated confrontation arrived, cloaked in an uneasy calm. Thomas felt the tension in the air, thicker than the dark clouds that rolled above. They all took their positions, hearts pounding, the weight of their resolve hanging heavily in their chests. When the shadows appeared on the horizon, there was no turning back. The highwaymen approached, a larger group this time, their confidence unmistakable beneath the dark cloaks. Thomas stood at the forefront, fists clenched and heart steady. "Leave now and perhaps you won't regret it," he shouted, voice ringing through the stillness. One of the highwaymen laughed, indicating the gathered farmers. "You think a bunch of backwoods farmers can scare us?" Thomas stepped forward. "You're mistaken. We're not just farmers, we're protectors of this land. We've faced you before and beaten you." The bandits hesitated for a moment, confusion flashing in their eyes before the sound of clattering metal echoed in the trees, a signal from the farmers hidden in the shadows. Traps were set. No one would pass without facing the consequences. Thomas yelled, voice filled with determination. They sprang into action, men rushing forward with tools in hand. The chaos erupted as traps were triggered, snares and distractions catching the highwaymen off guard. What followed was a whirlwind of noise and movement, horses whinnying in panic, men shouting, and the noise of clanging metal. Thomas felt a surge of adrenaline as he pressed forward, flanked by neighbors ready to stand, side by side, ground beneath their feet shaking with unity. The highwaymen's faces shifted from arrogance to fear, shattered by the reality of a united community. They had underestimated not just Thomas, but the spirit of everyone who worked beside him. As the victory neared, one of the bandit leaders tried to regroup his men, but the fear was overwhelming. He yelled, bolting away with the others in tow. The remaining bandits turned and fled into the dense woods, realizing they had underestimated the farmers' collective strength. When the dust settled, cheers erupted across the fields, echoing in the night air like joyful shouts of a well-fought battle. Thomas raised his arms, breathless but filled with joy. He had done it again. Together, they had defended their land not just with brute force but with the heart of a community. As dawn broke, illuminating the fields where they had stood and fought, Thomas felt something shift within him. Honor, pride, and an unwavering sense of resilience grew stronger than ever. The bond that had formed amongst them became a testament to the power of unity, the force that no bandit could ever break. As they gathered, sharing stories of bravery and laughter that morning, Thomas realized that they weren't just farmers anymore. They were guardians of their land, and they had instilled a hope that would persist through the storms. Together, they lived on as custodians of that fierce spirit, turning their land into a sanctuary not solely for crops but for each other. And so, this tale of defiance etched itself into the fabric of the community, whispering through the rustling wheat fields long after the last battle had ended, a legacy of courage that would inspire generations to come. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the tranquil fields of Maple Grove Farm. It was just another ordinary evening, until the distant sound of galloping hooves pierced the silence, sending a jolt through the heart of farmer Sam Reynolds. He'd heard the whispers in town, the chilling rumors about highwaymen who roamed the countryside, riding like predatory hawks ready to swoop down on their unsuspecting prey. Tonight, it felt all too real. As Sam peered through the dim light, anxiety twisted in his gut. Two figures atop horseback emerged from the swirling dust, cloaked in dark leather, their faces obscured by hoods. They were approaching fast, like grim reapers come to collect their due. Swallowing hard, Sam's grip on the porch railing tightened. He called out, his voice steadier than he felt. The larger of the two riders sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "We want your grain, old man." Fear coursed through Sam's veins. He had worked for years to build this farm, pouring his heart and soul into every seed he sowed. There was no way he could let them take it, no way he would give in. Sam's voice took on a commanding tone, surprising even himself. "What's yours? It's just grain." "You can't stop us," the second bandit laughed, confidence edging on foolishness. The truth was, Sam didn't have the strength to fight them head-on, not without help. But that didn't mean he was out of options. A plan was brewing in the depths of his mind, something he had been working on in secret. Just as panic threatened to creep in, an idea sparked, an idea born not from desperation, but from resourcefulness. He had always been a man of the land, capable of bending circumstances to his will. As the bandits approached, Sam raised his chin, his stomach nodding with purpose. "You think I'm scared? You don't know who you're dealing with. This land has been in my family for generations." The bandits exchanged glances, a flicker of doubt igniting in their eyes. "Defend it," the larger bandit mocked, though his bravado was beginning to waver. "You'll soon see," Sam replied, stepping off the porch, his heart pounding not just with fear but with clarity. As the bandits advanced, Sam retreated slowly, leading them deeper into his field. There, hidden among the crops, stood his secret weapon, scarecrows he had meticulously crafted over the past few weeks. But these were no ordinary scarecrows. Each one was dressed in the tattered attire of a soldier, crafted to look lifelike enough to instill fear. Sam called back, a cunning glint in his eye. Intrigued, the highwaymen followed, ever so slightly hesitant. Sam could feel their confidence wavering as they took in the sight before them, the scarecrows standing tall, illuminated by the fading light of day. "What are these supposed to be?" The smaller bandit scoffed, but his voice trembled ever so slightly. He stepped closer to a scarecrow, pointing to the wooden face painted with fierce determination. The larger bandit exchanged a nervous glance with his partner, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Sam sensed the moment was ripe for a bold maneuver. Sam asked, his voice even, but fierce determination shone in his eyes. The bandits paused, clearly unsure of how to respond. The smaller one said, his bravado cracking. Suddenly, Sam flicked a metal switch tied to the scrawny wooden structures. In an instant, the scarecrows sprang to life. Mechanisms that Sam had fashioned from old farm equipment whirred and clanked, sending vibrations through the ground, mimicking the sound of footsteps. "What the larger bandit shouted, stumbling backward as the scarecrows appeared to move, swinging their makeshift weapons. Sam seized the moment. "You're not just dealing with a farmer." The two highwaymen froze, adrenaline flooding their systems. Fear ignited in their eyes as the scarecrows bore down on them, their movements frantic yet calculated. Sam knew the power of fear. It could work wonders against those too cocky to recognize their fate. The bandit yelled, his previous bravado evaporating into thin air. They turned their horses and galloped off into the encroaching darkness, leaving nothing but dust in their wake. For a moment, the world stood still. Silence washed over the fields as the tension slowly receded. Sam took a deep breath and let the exhilaration surge through him. He had held his ground, outsmarted the thieves, and defended his home. But the victory was bittersweet. As night fell, he knew this would not be the last he saw of them. As word spread of his confrontation, the townspeople gathered, breathless with amazement. "You sent them running with your scarecrow army?" they asked, their eyes wide with admiration. In the days to come, he relayed his strategy, fostering a sense of community among the farmers. They began fortifying their own lands, sharing ideas to protect what belonged to them. The spirit of resilience began to bloom like the very crops they tended to. But shadows loomed just beyond the horizon. The threat of the highwaymen crept closer as whispers emerged about a larger gang forming, a group more dangerous than the first. This time, word came that the highwaymen were recruiting more men. Sitting around a fire on a chilly autumn evening, Sam gathered the locals around him. "We need to come together," he said, his voice filled with urgency. Ideas flew through the air like sparks, each suggestion more inventive than the last. They planned new defenses, mechanisms that could create noise and confusion, distractions that would scatter any intruders. Sam felt the weight of their trust resting heavily on his shoulders. The air was electric with tension as they fortified Maple Grove, building barricades and honing their weapons. But as nights turned to days, a bitter realization settled over Sam. The highwaymen were not just a threat to him. They threatened the entire community. Then one fateful night, just as the harvest moon rose high, Sam spotted dark figures on the horizon, moving like shadows towards the farm. His heart dropped. This was it. The moment they had prepared for had arrived, yet doubt crept in. Could they defend their homes? The farmers gathered quickly, readying themselves as adrenaline surged through their veins. With each heartbeat, Sam felt the weight of his resolve wash over him. "We fought them once," he urged. As darkness cloaked the landscape, the highwaymen came closer, larger in number, their confidence bolstered by the bonds of their band. Sam could see them now, illuminated by the moonlight, their faces hardened with intent. He felt the collective tension rising among his friends, hands tightening around makeshift weapons, hearts pounding in unison. "Remember what we've built together," Sam called out, voice steady. The highwaymen shouted, their laughter cutting through the night air, but this time it was filled with a sinister edge. "You think you can scare us this time, farmer?" Sam stood his ground, heart racing, but defiance surged through him. "You may think you have the upper hand, but we're ready for you." With a nod, the farmers sprang into action, tightening their formation. The traps they had set were in place, and as the highwaymen drew nearer, the atmosphere thickened with tension. That's when Sam initiated the noise. Trap skins rattled, breaking the silence like a thunderclap, startling the advancing bandits. Sam shouted, leading the charge forward. The farmers followed, strength in numbers as they pressed toward the intruders, determination etched in their expressions. Chaos erupted as the two sides clashed. The highwaymen, taken by surprise, were met with a wave of resistance far greater than anticipated. Sam swung his makeshift pitchfork, fending off attackers as the farmers rallied behind him, pushing back against the storm. For every swing and every shout, a sense of camaraderie painted the battlefield. Every farmer knew the stakes. They were not just fighting for grain or land, but for their families, their futures. But just as victory felt tangible, a new voice cut through the fray, a commanding shout from the highwaymen's leader, larger and fiercer than the others, a shadow in the mayhem. In that moment, hope flickered precariously like flames in the wind. Sam felt his heart race, battling fatigue and disbelief. Was their unity strong enough to outweigh the fury of this formidable band? They pressed on, the clash of metal and the cries of men echoing through the chaos. But in the midst of the turmoil, the tide began to shift when Sam spotted the leader charging toward him. A sense of dread settled heavy on his shoulders. With a deep breath, he plunged forward, adrenaline surging through his veins. This was it, the defining moment when everything could change. Would courage conquer fear, or would this fight finally break their spirits? The moment hung, suspended in time, as the leader surged forward, grim determination in his eyes, and Sam braced for what might come next, the weight of destiny resting on his shoulders. Would he be able to defend everything he loved, or would this prove to be the greatest challenge of his life? And just as they collided, the world around them blurred into chaos, leaving the outcome hanging in the balance, fate itself caught in the throes of the fight.